For the past decade, the major trend in the South African investment space has been the growing number of local investors looking to offshore investments to hedge their earnings against a volatile rand. But the trend is changing. The next big thing is a strong interest in residency or citizenship by investment programs. The citizenship by investment industry started in 1984 when the Caribbean nation of St. Kitts and Nevis launched its program. But it only really gained traction with the introduction of the first European citizenship program in Cyprus in 2011. Today, a host of countries offer residency and citizenship by investment, including Portugal, Mauritius, Malta, and Gibraltar. With what South Africans are now looking for is a plan B. And this is looking for something that gives them greater benefits, tax efficiency, investment and business opportunities, improved lifestyle, education opportunities, and of course, greater freedom of movement. The Foreign Residency and Citizenship by Investment, or RCBI programs, are gaining ground across the continent. But today, we're focusing on how South Africans are looking to offshore investments in this space. I'm Tolulope Adeleru Balogun. Welcome. This is Business Edge. Joining me today is Mabel Akinlabi. She's the CEO of Browns Group based in South Africa. Mabel, good morning and welcome to Business Edge.
Good morning. Thank you so very much for having me.
All right, so let's get into the background of this. So one of the reasons that we've been seeing local investors, particularly in South Africa, looking for offshore investments is that the rand has been very volatile for the past few years. So let's start with that. What's the issue with the rand? Why is it seeming that the rand is chasing investors out of South Africa?
So I just want to start this off by saying I'm not some super economist.
And That's fine.
I'm going to try my absolute best to look at this from the angle of an ordinary person and an entrepreneur. So as we all know, no currency is an island, and what happens in the rest of the world absolutely positively affects what happens in a particular nation. And because of, I don't want to say the volatility in oil prices, but the volatility of oil prices and what the dollar has been looking like in the past couple of years, it's definitely contributed to what the South African rand is going to act like. Also, we've had a wide array and a bright color of, I'll say, leadership changes. And when leadership does change and the rest of the world views politics as somewhat unstable in a nation, that will definitely affect the rand. The rand is still one of the strongest currencies on the continent, but off of the greenback, that is what would mostly affect the rand, the dollar.
Okay. So now, before this trend of the RCBI program sort of gaining ground, what were investors looking to put their money in? Where were they sort of hedging their bets in terms of getting some returns and some kind of benefits?
So let's do this. Speaking as a Black South African female, most Black South Africans haven't had the opportunity to invest in anything since before 1994. And I'd say in the late 90s is when we started to realize that we could have interests in other businesses. But I'll speak for those Black and white South Africans and Indians who were affluent in business and who had the funds or the finances to be investing in other sectors. A lot of South Africans have invested in the mining sector. There's been a lot of investment in infrastructure and manufacturing, in agro-processing. But we also look at the fact that it's human beings that are doing all this investing, and human beings are led a lot by their emotions. And I don't want to say that even though numbers tell us what's going on around the world, people's families and their emotions also dictate where they invest into. But those have been our major investments so far. But now we've had a lot of changing political climates. There have been new legislations, new acts being considered to being passed for mining. for infrastructure, and for manufacturing. So that's where everyone used to look to. But now that the world is a much more accessible place, it's a lot easier to look elsewhere.
Okay. So now people are looking elsewhere. How many people?
Yeah.
What's the interest? Tell me about sort of the interest that you're seeing South Africans now take in these RCBI programs. Is there particularly something that's pushing it? As I know, a lot of these countries are now even advertising these foreign residency and citizenship programs online, so they're catching attention from small and even larger business owners. But what's the uptake? What's the numbers? What's the situation? Is this now a conversation that seems to be very open that's being had in South Africa now?
Absolutely. So South Africa has seen about 900,000 odd something white South Africans emigrating. But that's been balanced out by the 900 something thousand of immigrants that we have received. But with this being said, so here's a weird number. In China, millennials, 35 years and under, are the major spenders in luxury goods. But that's not a phenomenon that's just happening in China. So in South Africa too, we're seeing a lot of young Black professionals who are looking for, I'd say, greener pastures elsewhere. So we're actually seeing a lot more Black South Africans emigrating than there are white South Africans emigrating. And I'd want to give you the numbers, but I'd be lying right now. But we're looking at what, 26,000 annually. And that's a large number of skilled South Africans who are leaving, and they're all at a very workable age. So they're people who are great income earners, great tax contributors. I don't see it as a necessarily terrible thing, because this is currently the phenomenon all around the world.
So when you make this when you bring up this immigration aspect to it, there are a lot of people who say that that's really what these programs are about. But some have said it's really about having a place to keep your money. And as you said, looking at the rand against the greenback. So do you think this is an immigration conversation, or it's an investment conversation, or it's one that combines the two?
It's definitely both. The financial issues and the financial aspects are 100% there. But I don't think there's been a time where we've been able to dream more than now. New York is not as far as it used to be. And neither is Malta, neither is New Zealand. The internet has made me having the desire to live anywhere else a lot more accessible. The fact that I can be on a 9-hour flight and be back home so my children can see their grandparents has made life a lot easier. But yes, insecurity or security or lack of definitely contributes to immigration and looking for financial stability in other places. But because the world is so connected, it really does blur the lines between where is your permanent home and are you really emigrating? Are you really immigrating? It is so much easier to get back home, so much easier to send money back home. But because we've now, as white and Black Africans, got access to be leaving the continent or leaving the country, storing your eggs somewhere else looks like a safe option. I don't want to say in case poop hits the fan, because it's a lot easier than it used to be. It's that simple.
So do you think this is a diversion when you have local South African investors looking to these RCBI programs to invest in, because they come with quite a hefty price tag, let's be very honest. Is this a diversion, or it's simply just another avenue of investing? Because that money is leaving the South African economy. It is going somewhere else. And when you now add the immigration of this sector of South Africans who are in the job markets, who are supposed to be getting the skills and then eventually moving up, possibly becoming employers of labor, who are supposed to be paying taxes, but they're elsewhere now. Is this a diversion from the local economy, and what impact do you think it'll have? While the numbers are still relatively mild and balanced out, as you said, by those who are leaving and those who are coming, what do you think the overall impact is?
It is a diversion, definitely. I mean, nobody wants to see any money leave their wallet, let alone an entire country. So yes, it is a diversion. And in the long run, if a country or a nation is continuously headed down a downward spiral, there is no way out of it. And I don't want to use certain countries as examples, but I'm forced to. If you just look at our neighbors, if we look at Zimbabwe, they were considered the breadbasket of Africa. And things did not look up. Instead, they took a further downward spiral, and it meant that a lot of young professionals left. A lot of people who had the potential of becoming young professionals left. It would definitely affect an economy, 100%, 100%. Whether we like it or not, skilled labor is crucial to any growing economy. And if you have 10 people who have zero skills, who stay in one area, all staying in that area and remaining unemployed, and we compare that to one professional who's an engineer or who's an architect or who could be a potential entrepreneur who could have hired those 10 people, it's a proper problem. But I will say this though, when we look at the volatility politically and financially of South Africa in comparison to its neighbors on the African continent, it isn't on a downward spiral. And I'm not trying to paint rainbows and sprinkles, but it isn't on a downward spiral. And yes, it does affect the economy that we have professionals that are leaving, but we are seeing some professionals return, and they return because they're Africans and home is important and they want their kids to see their grandparents and be raised the African way. So yes, it's not great for the economy, but the country is not headed down a downward spiral.
Okay, so let's take a break here. When we come back, we'll look at if it's a possibility that African countries can even start to offer some of these types of RCBI programs as well, and also look at whether or not this is more about investment or exploitation of, unfortunately, the circumstances and situations that many African nations find themselves. Mabel, hold the line. The conversation is continuing, of course. We have South Africans exploring new opportunities or new methods of investing that involve foreign residency and citizenship programs. But this means they're investing their hard-earned local currency elsewhere. The conversation continues right after this. Still with me on Business Edge is Mabel Akinlabi, CEO of Browns Group from South Africa, and of course looking at how South Africans are now exploring the citizenship by investment industry. Now, this industry started in 1984 with St. Kitts and Nevis, but gained traction with the introduction of the first European citizenship program in 2011. Some people see it as a subtle exploitation of investment opportunities, and others see it as an ingenious method of improving the economy. So, Mabel, when you look at that and the fact that some of these countries are using this money from these programs for their own economy, and there's a loss, there's a drain, maybe not so much right now, but there is a drain on other African economies because of the money moving there. Where do you stand? Is it an exploitation of unfortunate circumstances, or is it really just providing an investment opportunity for people to take advantage of?
So I really can't call it an exploitation. If my neighbor doesn't have bread, it's fine. I could give my neighbor bread. But how long am I going to feed my neighbor for? That's the kind of question. And now we're looking at a greater scope where we're talking countries. If Malta sees that people in Nigeria, people in South Africa are going through certain issues, we honestly don't expect Malta to be sending us aid or send us free money to help us out, because people look after their own homes. It's that simple. And even though it is somewhat of an exploitation, it really is, it's quite ingenious. And if Africa could offer this, it could offer similar incentives to our European and our American counterparts, 100%, we absolutely should.
So I think the only people really following that trail right now is Mauritius in terms of that offering. But yes, what do you think it would take for Africa to be at that point? Because you also have to have something that an investor wants. You also have to be able to offer some type of benefits if somebody was to be interested in RCBI programs on the African continent. So what would it take for maybe a South Africa to be able to offer that kind of program to investors from outside of South Africa?
Yes, so South Africa and the rest of the continent sit at a catch-22, where we are a third world country and we are considered a developing nation. And in a developing nation, whether you like it or not, you need to look after your own. you 100% need to look after your own. But we are not an underdeveloped nation. So that's where South Africa does have some opportunities. And there are incentives that are in place, that have been put in place by the government, that welcome foreign investment and that benefit foreign investment. However, I believe that foreign investors might still be slightly put off by the government's aims and the government's attempts to ensure that they build up South Africans themselves. So to qualify for some government funding and some government programs, you need to have BEE scoring. You need to have a certain type of equity in your business. It must be a certain percentage must be owned by a Black South African female or by a South African. And countries that are developed don't have the pressures that South Africa does. So yes, we can definitely give some tax incentives, 100%. 100% we can give tax incentives. It is already quite easy to register a corporation or a business in South Africa. We could definitely make it a lot easier. I think we can make it also a little easier for non-residents, simple things, non-residents to have their kids go to school at the same price that South African kids go to school. I had a lot of colleagues whose parents could not afford to buy a car or a house because this person's law degree took 4 years and they needed to pay 50% of the tuition for 4 years up front. And it meant that if you were on a study permit, you would not be entitled, to the same benefits a South African would be. So if we look at immigration and we look at finances and funding businesses and equity and legislation, there's still a lot more that we can do. But again, like I said, you need to have South Africans involved. It doesn't make sense for a large corporation to come in, own 100% of a business, monopolize an entire sector and not involve local people. And that's where the problem is with a developing country.
And so I want to stick here because there's a lot of conversation about lowering the tax burden, also eliminating the investment barriers, and you've listed a number of things. But then you've also come to the other side about having foreign businesses come in, monopolize sectors, and not have locals involved at management or even ownership. Is there any possibility, are there moves right now to have those things change? Because this is a really big issue. We also have a situation where South Africans are trying to avoid taxes as well. And we've heard that, of course, the SARS team has been sending letters to South Africans trying to avoid taxes who are looking for ways and loopholes. We also understand, of course, with South Africa having the highest gap in inequality on the continent. So it's an obvious problem that the South African economy is facing. Are there moves being made to try to bridge the gap, to make the adjustments, and also make the economy quite attractive to investors?
So I want to start off by firstly patting South Africa on the back for its data. The fact that there are as many countries as there are on the African continent, but South Africa is a leader in data, shows us where our major problems are. So it's all good and well to say South Africa has the biggest gap, but let's be honest, let's look at everywhere else on the continent. It's just because we don't have the numbers. It's because we haven't gotten the data. There are problems that South Africa shares with the rest of the continent. So number one, absolutely work harder on knowing your story, South Africa. The data is fantastic. We know how much people are earning. We know how much people are not earning. Secondly, I'm very happy that SARS is trying to collect its funds from people because yes, as South Africans who have access to Mauritius, I understand why SARS would feel like it's missing out on monies it could potentially be getting. But sorry, just repeat the last part of your question for me, please. Real
okay,
quick,
so I was now asking.
I'd like to comment on them.
No problem. So are there moves being made right now to address these gaps, to make adjustments that would make the economy more attractive for investment?
Oh, 100%. And I think you're asking the right gender of the right race. So as somebody who is an entrepreneur in South Africa, who is married to somebody who's not a South African citizen, I've seen the difference between how his business and my business would run in conjunction to each other. So I've seen the South African government attempt to close the gaps by welcoming foreign investment, because whether we like it or not, we are not the masters of every single industry. And the more industries we master, the better. I've seen that the South African government has instituted certain policies, and there are programs running in high schools and universities, but also really importantly, they have made funding accessible to previously disadvantaged individuals. They're called PDIs. And I remember between 2010, no, I'm lying, 2000 and 2010, there was a strong push to have previously disadvantaged individuals who are now professionals have a little more advantage than individuals who are not previously disadvantaged. So for example, if you were an attorney in South Africa and you were obviously doing legal work, there's an office called the Master's Office that handles all deceased estates. And they were ensuring that a lot of previously disadvantaged attorneys were getting a lot of work from the state. But that's just one section. Schools, universities, for instance, if you would like to study medicine, there's a quota on how many Black South African girls get in, how many white South African males get in, and there's a push going on to ensure that previously disadvantaged individuals are pushed a little bit more and are a little more visible in sectors that we were not visible before.
All right, so maybe as we wrap up, the conversation started with looking at how South Africans are looking at offshore investments, particularly the RCBI programs. We're heading into 2022. The South African economy came out of recession early last year into 2019, but still facing issues. We're all still battling to overcome the impact of the COVID-19 virus as it may be. South Africa discovered, or rather announced, the Omicron variant for the world. But now when you look at what you expect into 2022, are you expecting to see an increase in South Africans continue to look into these programs, even as the economy back home tries to find its feet and get back on the full path of recovery?
I absolutely think so. And I'm going to move away from cents and numbers for 1 second. And I'd like to give you a very silly example. A while ago, a few friends and I, we did some research on vehicles. And we discovered that it was not just vehicles, but all technology that needed a microchip was experiencing a shortage in South Africa, but not just South Africa, but the rest of the world. And we went to a particular dealership. I'll mention their name. It was a Land Rover or Range Rover dealership. And we got there and we wanted to see what was new. And we were told that there were no cars on the floor because since the coronavirus broke out, people had decided to get their savings, walk into a dealership, and lay $500,000 on the table and be like, I'm going to take this car, which is a phenomenon we've not really seen in South Africa because we're a very credit-based country. Yeah. We're not as cash-driven as the rest of the continent because we've always had access to credit. We've always had the facilities there for credit. So we've seen a lot of emotional spending, a lot of emotional moving, and a lot of people, no offense, thinking that life is too short. So yes, I definitely see an upsurge in this trend. People are definitely going to be looking out to the rest of the world for better investment opportunities, because everywhere everyone has ever wanted to go, every business, every venture that people have ever wanted to explore, they're exploring.
Yeah. All right, so maybe we'll leave it there as for now. As you said earlier, the world is not as far. New York is no longer far. Australia, New Zealand are no longer as far as they physically were. And so that opens up a world of opportunities, not just for travelers, but also investors. Mabel Akinlabi, thank you so much for joining me on Business Edge.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. Have a good day.
And it's definitely not just South Africans who are looking to offshore investments involving foreign residency and citizenship investment programs. This is a trend that's growing across the continent, but there are concerns as to the money it's taking out of the local African economy. The 2022 will show if this trend continues or if economies are able to arrest it as they look for more money to recover from COVID-19. You're watching Business Edge. When we come back, it's NC4 to watch. And now a few stories that we're keeping our eyes on. We've been following the crude oil prices globally, and we have an interesting updates for you. Now, we had, of course, a conversation on Tuesday that those prices went down, but all prices now have risen on Thursday to extend several consecutive days of gains, buoyed by data showing that U.S. fuel demand is holding up well despite soaring Omicron coronavirus infections. The U.S. is reporting hundreds of thousands of infections daily. Zimbabwe's oldest and largest mining firm, Hwange Colliery Company Limited, has contracted a German-based company to help find solutions to underground coal fires. Now, the fires have been burning for years and are threatening the homes and lives of 20,000 people in its main coal mining town. The Kenya Railways Corporation has suspended operations on the Nairobi commuter train service for 6 days due to a fall in passenger demand during the festive season. Services on key city routes will grind to a halt up to January 3rd, 2022, denying commuters left in Nairobi the convenience of using the trains. And finally, Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari has assured manufacturers in the country that his administration would take appropriate measures to ease access to foreign exchange for importation of raw materials and machines that are not available locally. The promise by the president was a reaction to requests on making the manufacturing sector more contributory to the Nigerian economy. And that's Business Edge for today. Follow us on social media at News Central TV. Download our mobile app and, of course, watch us wherever you are. You can, of course, download the app, take us with you, and watch us on Star Times, Avo TV, Freeview, Limex, and much more. I'm Tolulope Adeleru Balogun. Have a fantastic day.